So you had a tough childhood, and you've come to the realization that you now need to heal this wounded inner child within you. But the only reason you have a wounded inner child is because you didn't have the appropriate caretakers or an emotional support growing up. So how do we even learn how to heal this inner child? Well, welcome to the lovely process of reparenting. So reparenting is becoming the parent or caretaker and the emotional support that you were likely lacking in your childhood or while you were growing up. Now, reparenting is rooted in this process of inner bonding or connecting with that inner self. If we likely went through trauma or didn't receive the appropriate support growing up, we likely had to disconnect from our inner self and erect a false self to survive and get through. Now, for the sake of this presentation, the inner child is located in our feeling and emotional body, right? And our inner adult is our rational, logical self. Our inner adult is the part of us that is external. It is the part of us that is action-oriented, that is doing things outside. Our inner child is the internal self. It is from within. And as we talked about, if you went through a tough childhood, you likely had to detach from your inner self because the feelings and emotions were overwhelming. So, reparenting is the process of we have to now become open. We have to set an intention to learn about this inner self that we weren't able to cultivate when we were younger. And the road to attaching or connecting with this inner child, with this inner self that we need to reparent is through the heart center, okay? This inner child likely exists within the solar plexus or abdominal region, all right? So most of us had to block our heart or shut our heart down to survive. So the first step in reparenting is allowing one's heart to reopen, which likely means having to process grief, sorrow, sadness that got stuck that we couldn't process when we were younger. So what is the steps to reparenting? Like I said, reparenting, I honestly believe, is a difficult part of the healing process. In all honesty, right? When we get to that inner child healing, it requires us to become the loving adult that we needed when we were younger, but we haven't been modeled that from our parents. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is we need to recognize the inner conflict that exists, okay? We need to become aware of our feelings. As we talked about, many of us detached from our emotions when we were growing up. So we have to bring our awareness into our bodies. We have to notice when there is tension between our thoughts and the sensations going on internally. If there is this dissonance between our thought processes, we're fine, but we feel this tension and resistance in our body, it means that our emotional self is not connected to our inner adult. So we have to become aware, we have to drop our awareness into the body, and we have to become curious about what our emotions and feelings are. Next, we need to respond as a loving adult. We need to move into the attention to learn. Part of being a loving adult is taking responsibility for yourself. You have to take responsibility for your feelings. And then you need to get curious about what is going on. If you see a child down the road crying, you don't go, oh yeah, no, that's terrible, just stop that. No. You begin to become curious, like what is going on? What is happening? You just set an intention to be open. Most of us protected and disconnected from our inner self. We shut ourselves down from understanding the experience. So becoming a loving adult is becoming curious, setting the intention to learn. We must be open and willing to feel pain. We must be open and willing to recognize and take in uncomfortable truths. We had to shut ourselves down from this out of survival, but the process of reparenting is opening this container so that we can feel the pain, so that the pain becomes welcomed, right? Now, we also have to move beyond black and white thinking and judgment of right or wrong. If we set an intention that we are going to criticize or shame what's coming up, then the inner child self is just going to shut down, right? It's about not being judgmental. It's about being loving. Now, the next step is to dialogue with your inner child, okay? And so when we dialogue with our inner child, we are essentially having a conversation with his inner self. This takes time and this takes practice. Sometimes it's good to go into a visualization exercise. Imagine yourself when you were younger, right? feel into your gut when you're doing this, or your heart space where this inner child is, this consciousness of this inner child is likely to be located. All right. And then you also say, or you could also use a stuffed animal or anything else from your childhood that represents this inner child. Now, you want to ask questions. This could be out loud or this could be through journaling, but you're basically getting curious on what this inner child's experience is. If you feel tension within the body or you feel sadness or anger, ask this part of you, why do you feel this way, right? Ask, have I let you down in some way? While this may sound a little weird, answers will come, and you have to open that container and allow that first answer that pop up to be the truth, okay? This is the part of your consciousness that you may not have access that is now trying to integrate. Remember, it fragmented, it fractured off, and it is trying to reconnect. So, when the inner child lets us know what's wrong, right? Maybe we did abandon it. Maybe we did shame it. Maybe we're not resting when it needs to rest. Maybe we're not listening to our inner self. Maybe we're with a partner that our inner child doesn't feel valued by or doesn't feel safe with. What do we do now? What do we do once we have the answers? This is one of the more difficult steps. Dialoguing with your higher power. Yes, when we didn't receive the caretaking we needed growing up, we weren't modeled that, we're going to have to get a little spiritual. We're going to have to move beyond the ego, move beyond the false self, and gain a connection to something higher than ourselves, okay? And this higher self of ours, whatever you want to deem it, whatever you want to term it, right? It's going to not have judgments. It's going to be loving, it's going to be wise, and it's going to be insightful. It's going to be much wiser than anything your ego could come up with. So we set an intention to dialogue with the higher aspect of ourselves, with this higher power. Okay, this higher energetic self. And so we ask, what is the loving, appropriate behavior to what my inner child said? Is there truth behind this inner child's belief, right? Or is this a trigger? What is the loving action that I need to take? And wait for the answer, right? If it's critical or if it's judgmental, it's not your higher self. It's not a higher power. But you are essentially opening the door to your soul to come through. Your soul knows what to do. So it is removing the blocks between the ego and the soul or the higher self that allows us to really complete this reparenting process. And when we get the answers, whether it's journaling it down or whether we're hearing it in our thoughts, we now need to take action, all right? The adult self needs to come in and be that caretaker, right? It needs to protect that inner child. It may be setting a boundary with someone. It may be no longer caretaking, right? What else do we have here? We might be allowing ourselves to rest, right? Maybe you've been going, trying to achieve, trying to gain validation. Maybe this inner child or your feeling emotional self needs to slow down. When we get that answer from our higher self, from this higher power, we need to take action on behalf of that answer and give the loving action that this inner child self did not get when we were younger. Our inner child will come with a lot of false beliefs, right? Reparenting is this multifaceted process. Like I said, it can be difficult, but it's important to recognize the false beliefs that can be inherent within someone's inner child, okay? You need to be aware of this because it is correcting these false beliefs that allows us to heal, because we are oftentimes operating under these unconscious beliefs since we're not connected to our inner child, and this really creates self-sabotage and destruction within our job, within our relationships, right? Within all areas of our lives. So what are the false beliefs that this inner child can hold? There is something wrong with me. This is due to shame. I am bad. I am not worthy of love. There is something inherently wrong. When our true self wasn't validated, when our feelings and emotions weren't validated growing up, we internalize it as children that there's something inherently wrong with me. And so our adult self, our rational mind, can sometimes disconnect from that belief, but it's still driving us from the feeling emotional self and in the unconscious. I am powerless over how I feel. This is when we shift blame onto someone else for our emotions, right? Where we expect someone else to be responsible for how we're feeling, when we're not accepting responsibility for ourselves. This has been an issue for me throughout my adult years in life at points, right? Because if we watch adults never take responsibility for themselves, shift blame onto us as children, like the reason why the adult's not doing well is because of the child, right? Or because of the partner, their husband, wife, right? Mother, father, whatever you want to, whatever, right? We could believe that we're not responsible for our feelings, but we are responsible. We have to take responsibility for our feelings and emotions. Other people's feelings are more important than mine, and I am responsible for their feelings. If you were parentified as a child, if the roles were reversed where you were responsible for the parents' feelings, then you may believe that everyone else's feelings outside of you are more important, and that you are selfish for even taking in your emotions. I can control what others think of me, feel about me, and how they treat me, right? This is an inner child belief that we need to control our external environments. If it wasn't safe when we were younger, we're trying to control how everyone reacts and interacts with us. We have to let go that we can't control the narrative about us. All we can control is how we handle things internally and how we show up in the world. But we can't control how other people do. And when we're trying to control other people's perceptions of ourselves, we're not being authentic. We're not being tapped into our true self. We're actually being manipulative in a way. Resisting someone's control over me is essential to my integrity. Oh boy, I struggle with this one. The inner child, if they felt like they were overly controlled growing up, believe that anytime anyone asks us of anything, even if it's something we want to do, we have to rebel against it, okay? So anytime there's expectations of us, right, to carry out a certain responsibility, that we have to rebel. This is a false belief of the inner child. Everyone is not trying to control us just because there are certain things asked of us. And lastly, the most important false belief that we will all encounter is, I can't handle pain, discomfort, fear, sorrow, grief, right? Fear, if I said that already, hurt, boredom, shame, all these. Any negative emotions we believe that we can't handle, because our negative emotions when we were younger were not validated. It was tried, our caretakers may have pushed them away. So but we believe that we can't feel these things because we haven't had the experience of allowing ourselves to feel it. And so it feels dangerous. We need to correct this belief and recognize that we are capable of experiencing emotional pain. We are not going to die from experiencing emotional pain. And it is a necessary requirement to connect with our inner self and to gain greater fulfillment. So what are some other tips on becoming this loving parent to ourselves when we haven't had a loving parent growing up? We need to accept the responsibility of being our own inner parent. Many times after we locate this inner child, sometimes we're like, all right, now it's our partner's job to take care of this inner child. Or it's still our parents' job to take care of it when they're not accepting responsibility. Or it's our friend, or it's our sibling's responsibility. It is our responsibility. And not only is it our responsibility to be our own inner parent, we have to be both the mother and father to our inner child. Yes, we have to be that strong structural support for our inner child, right? Direction, guidance, firmness, and the nurturing, caring mother figure. You're going to have to dialogue with your higher self, and you're going to have to play both roles, right? It is purely your responsibility, and you can't shift that responsibility onto someone else. You do have to access both the masculine and feminine qualities within you, and your soul self will have access to both energies, and just allow them to be called forward. And you can do both. It may sound like a lot, but you're capable. Imagine how you would behave and talk to a child that you adopted. This is a big one. I used to shame my inner child all the time. Like, oh my God, it's getting in the way of all the stuff I have to do. And but I thought about how my face lights up around a 3 or 4 year old, right? When I see them, okay? The innocence, right? And how I would never say anything bad to a child. I would never shame a child, right? But for whatever reason, we do that to ourselves. So imagine your inner child as what it is, a child. You're not going to talk badly to a child you just adopted. You're going to love it. You're going to take care of it. So you need to kind of create this dynamic within yourself. You also need to find your own value and worth. When we disconnect it from our inner child, we are likely trying to derive worth and value from things outside of ourselves. We're searching for external validation. I've struggled with this as well, right? This is due to a lack of healthy, loving caretakers growing up who are validating us appropriately. Maybe we're only valued on our skills or our abilities. It's about trying to find the inherent value. It's about recognizing that you are valuable just because you're alive and you're human. okay? And you need to affirm that to yourself and your inner self over and over again. Also, we need to continue to stay connected to our own internal environment. When we've been disconnected from this environment, it can become very scary, right, to go back in. And so we may connect with it for a time and then disconnect. But ultimately, we need to practice at staying connected within this internal environment. Not just when we're meditating, not just when we're closing our eyes, right? But to consciously be connected, to have our heart space open so we can traverse and build this bridge to connect with our inner child self. Be aware of when you're shaming yourself. It's really easy. It can even happen so quickly. But we cannot be a loving parent if we're constantly shaming ourselves. We have to rewire the narrative. We have to notice the shaming thoughts that come up, and we have to counter them. We have to be that loving parent. We have to say, no, you are not bad. I understand, validate the inner child. I understand why we feel bad, but we are not bad. Reparenting is a spiritual process. It is one that requires us to break down the walls of the ego and call our soul self forward and allow this higher power or the soul to lead us through this process. And we have to be open and willing to encounter some of the most difficult emotions that we've been pushing away throughout our lives. But it's worth it, because reparenting is the process that heals depression, that heals childhood traumas, that heals anxiety, okay? That heals this emptiness we feel inside. It's what allows us to finally cultivate self-love, all right? Thank you for watching this video. Please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and leave comments below if you have any questions or you want to share how your reparenting process